The grand ballroom of Ashbourne Manor glittered under the weight of 100 crystal chandeliers, each flame dancing upon polished parquet and gilded paneling as though the walls themselves were breathing. Snow fell lightly outside, brushing against the tall sash windows in delicate patterns, but inside, warmth and golden light held the night in a suspended, fragile perfection. Ladies swirled in silks of deepest sapphire, emerald, and crimson, their skirts rustling like autumn leaves, while gentlemen in black coats with satin cravats moved with the precision of a measured waltz. Yet amidst the elegance, a subtle tension rippled through the assembly, a murmur beneath the music, like a breeze that foretells a coming storm. It was there, at the very edge of this glittering sea, that Lady Eleanor Whitcombe, eyes bright with restless intelligence, stood apart, her hands lightly folded over the folds of her soft grey gown. Eleanor was every inch the image of genteel refinement, yet she carried herself with a poise that defied mere propriety. Her hair, a deep chestnut woven into a loose chignon, framed a face alive with thought, with curiosity, and with a spark that many of the ton had begun to deem improper for one of her standing. She had been raised to obey, to defer, to smile, and to occupy herself with embroidery and conversation as prescribed, yet in her soul simmered a hunger for something far beyond whispered expectations. The older ladies noted the tilt of her head, the sharpness in her gaze, and the way she chose her words, careful yet incisive, and they murmured amongst themselves, voices cloaked in polite concern that veiled 1,000 judgments. It was in this swirl of judgment and expectation that the first tremor of shame touched her, subtle yet keen, as Lady Montfort approached with a smile that was all honey and hidden thorns. "My dear Eleanor," the elder lady intoned, her voice rich with the authority of social hierarchy, "you must forgive my frankness, but I fear you dance far too recklessly with attention tonight. A gentleman does not take kindly to a lady's independence, however charming you may believe it." Eleanor's lips pressed together, her pulse quickening. There was truth in the words, though seasoned with malice. She bowed lightly, voice soft yet firm. "Your counsel is noted, Lady Montfort, and I shall endeavor to temper my enthusiasm." A few nearby whisperers tittered, as delicate fans fluttered and gazes flicked toward her with thinly veiled curiosity. Across the room, the Duke of Ashbourne observed in quiet restraint. He stood in the shadow of an ornate pillar, a figure of poise and commanding presence, yet his eyes followed Eleanor with an intensity that few could fathom. At 32, he had navigated the treacherous waters of court life with a blend of charm, influence, and discretion. His reputation was formidable, and yet, beneath the veneer of control, there lingered a restless tenderness reserved solely for the lady he had first noticed at a spring ball the previous year. The subtle curve of her brow, the small flush on her cheek when spoken to sharply, the way her hands moved as if conducting an invisible symphony, these details consumed him in moments when all else fell away. And yet, society demanded silence. No word of affection, no glance that might betray improper intent, could risk the delicate balance of reputation. So he watched, a silent guardian cloaked in propriety, knowing that every unspoken word weighed upon him as heavily as any sword might. The music swelled, a waltz that carried both grandeur and melancholy, and Eleanor felt the tension of her world pressing ever more firmly against her chest. She longed to move beyond the glittering floor, beyond the eyes that judged, and to act upon her own sense of purpose. It was then that her father's letters, previously concealed within her reticule, pressed against her palm with urgent insistence. The papers, hastily written in his distinctive hand, demanded her immediate attention. Documents that could not wait, matters of estate and business that, in her father's view, required a presence far from the heated ballrooms of London. A prickle of excitement mingled with anxiety. The ride to the Yorkshire moors, through snow and winter's bite, would be perilous. She knew the moor's hidden streams, the frost-laden roads, the treacherous ice that could claim the unwary, and yet she felt the pull of duty stronger than any fear. To refuse would invite censure, to undertake the journey alone would be a risk no lady should contemplate, and yet, Eleanor's spirit, restless and determined, refused the safe path. Lady Montfort's gaze lingered for a moment, sharp and speculative, noting the letters in Eleanor's hand, but she said nothing, choosing instead to redirect her attention to the dance. Eleanor allowed herself a quiet breath, feeling the weight of expectation loosen just slightly. She cast her eyes toward the Duke once more, meeting the faint shadow of his gaze across the room. He inclined his head imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement, and in that small gesture she felt both reassurance and the bittersweet sting of propriety. He would not interfere, not here, not now, but the knowledge that he observed, ready to act should the need arise, lent her a strange courage. For the first time that evening, Eleanor allowed herself a flicker of hope amidst the constraints of her world. As the clock in the great hall ticked toward midnight, Eleanor excused herself, leaving behind the warmth, the scrutiny, and the delicate murmur of judgmental voices. The snow outside had begun to fall heavier, a slow, deliberate curtain of white that would soon cloak the moors in silent peril. She stepped into the cold night, the crisp air biting her cheeks, and mounted her carriage with the care of one both resolved and cautious. The horses stamped their hooves, their breath misting in the night, and the lamps of London dwindled behind her, fading into the dark. Her heart beat in measured anticipation, part duty, part thrill, part unacknowledged yearning. She was venturing into the wild unknown, and in that venture she would encounter trials that no ballroom, no whispered judgment, could ever teach her to endure. Within the manor, the Duke remained a silent sentinel. His gaze lingered on the carriage as it disappeared into the snowy night, a mixture of relief and apprehension tightening his chest. He knew the moors, their hidden dangers, and the cruelty of winter storms that could turn a short journey into a perilous trial. His mind catalogued every possible hazard, every icy stream, every drifted path, and yet his steps remained measured, controlled, as though the very act of restraint could shield her from harm. Even as a man accustomed to command and authority, he felt powerless to hasten her journey, to insulate her from the unknown. And still, the fire of unspoken desire and protective instinct burned quietly, a light he dared not reveal in the company of others. As Eleanor's carriage rolled toward the outskirts of the city, the night deepened, and the first true gusts of a blizzard began to whip across the moors. She leaned forward slightly, peering through the frosted windows, her mind tracing the winding paths that would take her to her father's estate. Every instinct of caution warred with the thrill of autonomy, and she felt alive in a way London had never permitted. The social cage of her world, the whispered judgments, the careful propriety, all seemed distant as the snow embraced her journey. And yet, the shadow of risk, the invisible presence of peril, hovered at the edge of her consciousness, a silent herald of the trials yet to come. Eleanor's pulse quickened, not merely from the cold but from the exhilarating promise of what lay ahead. She was alone, yes, but determined, and in that resolve, there was a beauty and a vulnerability that the Duke, watching from afar, recognized immediately. For all the rules of decorum, for all the weight of expectation, for all the subtle glances and whispered admonishments, there remained this unspoken truth, that courage in the heart of a lady could inspire a loyalty, a protection, and a love that no winter storm could ever diminish. And as the carriage rattled over the frost-hardened roads, the stage was set for a confrontation not only with nature but with the hidden yearnings of two hearts long restrained by the demands of society. The night stretched on, silent save for the clatter of hooves and the wind's relentless call, and Eleanor's journey into the snow-swept wilderness had begun. Each moment, each breath, each shiver in the icy night was a prelude to the peril, the revelation, and the forbidden tenderness that awaited. And as the ballroom receded behind her, with its glittering judgment and polite malice, she carried forward a spark of defiance, a pulse of anticipation, and the quiet knowledge that her life, and her heart, would soon be forever altered. The moors stretched endlessly, a frozen wilderness under the silvered light of a waning moon, each hill and hollow dusted with pristine snow that muffled the sound of Eleanor's carriage wheels. The horses strained against the icy ground, their breath clouding the frigid night, and the wind tore through the landscape like a restless spirit, carrying with it the scent of pine, frost, and distant smoke from scattered cottages. Eleanor, wrapped tightly in her cloak, peered through the frosted glass with anxious determination. Every turn of the winding road revealed more treacherous terrain. Deep snowdrifts, jagged rocks veiled beneath white and half-frozen streams that could claim the unwary in a heartbeat. The urgency of her father's letters weighed upon her, yet the moors themselves seemed to challenge her resolve, as though the world were testing the strength of her courage before granting her passage. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her reticule, the leather smooth against her chilled skin, and she wondered briefly whether her choice to undertake this journey alone had been folly. She had been raised to obedience, to prudence, to the careful navigation of society's whims, yet the fire within her heart demanded action. She knew she could not rely upon a servant's escort without scandal, nor could she permit her father's wishes to languish in delay. So she pressed on, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of rebellion entwined within her pulse. The carriage rattled over a particularly treacherous section of road, and Eleanor's heart leapt as the horses stumbled, struggling to find purchase on ice that glittered like shards of glass beneath the moonlight. Far behind, the Duke of Ashbourne moved with quiet urgency. His mounted horse traced the same path with meticulous care, each hoofbeat muffled by the accumulating snow. He knew the moors as one might know the chambers of one's own estate, every ridge, every stream, every hidden pitfall memorized and catalogued. Yet familiarity did not diminish his concern. He had tracked Eleanor from London, piecing together her intended route from whispered rumors and careful observation. The knowledge that she faced the winter's cruelty alone sharpened his focus to a razor edge, a single-minded determination that ignored fatigue, cold, and propriety. In the depths of his calculated restraint, a pulse of fear, a rare, unwelcome visitor, tugged at him. She was no ordinary lady to be sheltered within the routine of society's strictures. She was fire, resolve, and unyielding spirit wrapped in the frail form of porcelain and silk. The wind rose, whipping through the moors with ferocity, and snow swirled in dizzying eddies. Eleanor urged the horses forward, her knuckles white against the reins. Visibility shrank to nothing, the moonlight lost beneath the howling storm. She could feel the cold creeping beneath her cloak, biting at her cheeks, her ears, her fingers relentless and insidious. For a moment she imagined the ballroom behind her, the warmth, the laughter, the glittering chandeliers, and then she forced herself to think of nothing but the letters in her possession, the task she had sworn to complete, and the steadiness required to survive the night. The sense of isolation pressed upon her, a tangible weight that made her stomach knot with fear, yet a stubborn defiance kept her spine straight, her eyes alert. The road curved sharply toward a hidden stream, partially frozen and glistening like a trap under the moonlight. One misjudged step would send the carriage skidding, plunging its occupants into icy water or snowdrifts from which rescue might be impossible. Eleanor leaned forward, her breath misting against the glass, calculating the angle of descent and urging the horses onward with quiet, precise commands. The carriage shuddered as it struck the edge of the ice, and for a terrifying heartbeat, it teetered, threatening to overturn. Panic surged, but she managed to guide it past the immediate danger, though the jolt left her trembling, not entirely from the cold. She understood in that instant how precarious the line between control and disaster truly was in a world governed not only by snow and frost but by circumstance and chance. Suddenly the horses stumbled on a patch of thin ice, and the carriage lurched violently. Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat as the ground vanished beneath the wheels, and the carriage tipped forward, one side plunging toward a half-frozen lake whose surface glimmered with treacherous opacity. The icy water lapped at the carriage's edge, and before she could cry out, the vehicle shuddered, tipped, and toppled. Eleanor was thrown into the snow with a gasp, the wind snatching her breath, the world spinning around her in white chaos. Her cloak was torn, her gloves lost, and her letters scattered across the snow, carried away by the storm's fury. Desperation clawed at her throat as she struggled to rise, only to feel the ice beneath her give way in a sudden, horrifying shift. She fell through, the frigid water engulfing her limbs, sapping her strength, testing the limits of her endurance. Panic threatened, but Eleanor's spirit would not surrender so easily. She clawed at the brittle ice, her fingers raw and numb, her body trembling with shock. She forced herself to breathe in measured bursts, focusing on movement, on survival, on the thought of her father's eyes should she fail him. Hours seemed to stretch in agonizing eternity as she fought against the freezing embrace, her strength waning, hope flickering like a candle in the wind. Each wave of water that pulled at her tested not only her body but her resolve, and yet she persisted, driven by the combination of duty and the faint ember of courage she had always carried. Meanwhile, the Duke pressed forward, the storm a living adversary that sought to conceal her, to claim her before he could intervene. Every step through knee-deep snow demanded effort, his hands and face reddened by frost, his heart hammering with a mixture of fear and determination. He recalled every detail of her, every glance, every word shared in fleeting moments at the ballroom and during clandestine encounters that society would never sanction. Those memories became a map, a compass as he pushed through the blizzard with single-minded devotion. He knew the dangers, the half-frozen lake, the hidden ice beneath the snow, the merciless night, and yet no thought of retreat entered his mind. The thought of her in peril lent him a courage that was as reckless as it was noble. Then, in a moment that seemed suspended in time, he saw her flailing amidst the ice, the snow around her whipped into a furious vortex, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Without hesitation he dismounted, stripped off gloves and with bare hands, broke the ice at the edges, pulling with every ounce of strength, his breath ragged, his body straining, but his determination absolute. The world seemed to narrow into this singular, desperate act. Her life balanced against the cold, the storm, and the limits of human endurance. And when finally her body was hauled onto solid snow, trembling, shivering, Yet alive, the two of them lay close together, hearts racing, eyes meeting with a mixture of fear, relief, and something far more profound, an acknowledgement of an unspoken bond that had endured in silence until now. As the blizzard howled around them, their proximity brought warmth neither had expected, the snow-laden moors witnessing a tender collision of survival and emotion. Eleanor's lips parted in a whisper of gratitude, and the Duke, still holding her close, allowed himself a rare, trembling smile. In that moment, propriety, fear, and decorum fell away, leaving only the raw, unguarded essence of two hearts beating in unison against the winter's cruelty. The storm remained relentless, but for the first time the night held a promise, a fragile, trembling promise, that what began with peril might yet bloom into something enduring and beautiful. The carriage had long since ceased its perilous journey over the moors, now parked before the Duke of Ashbourne's estate, a stoic manor half buried in snow, its stone walls glowing warmly from within as if defying the bitter night. Eleanor, shivering despite thick wraps and blankets hastily draped over her shoulders, allowed herself to lean against the sturdy arm of the Duke, whose steady presence radiated a warmth that no fire could replicate. The wind continued to howl outside, rattling window panes and stirring loose snow, yet within the room the world narrowed to the delicate proximity of two souls, bound by shared peril and the quiet gravity of unspoken emotion. She trembled, not from cold alone, but from the intensity of the moment, the precarious bridge between survival and something far more profound, something she had long concealed even from herself. The Duke's hands, roughened by travel and effort yet careful now, adjusted the blankets around her shoulders. "You must not allow yourself to tremble so," he said, his voice low, steady, and tempered with concern, though a subtle undertone betrayed the depth of his feeling. "The cold has passed, yet it lingers in the bones, and in truth, one cannot simply command such a storm from the heart." Eleanor's gaze lifted to meet his, the storm outside mirrored in the shadows of his eyes, and she felt her pulse quicken with an emotion she dared not name. Every look, every touch, carried meaning, layered with restraint, yet dripping with a tenderness that defied the rigid decorum of their world. Her lips parted, hesitant, as if her voice itself feared to trespass upon propriety. She began, then paused, caught between words and the weight of her own desires. The Duke's hand, warm and sure, rested lightly atop hers, and the simple gesture lent her courage. "Do not fear to speak," he whispered, the phrasing both a permission and an entreaty, as though the act of confession might illuminate the shadows that had long separated them. Eleanor drew a slow, measured breath, her fingers tightening around his for warmth, strength, and reassurance. "All my life," she said finally, voice trembling yet resolute, "I have moved within a world that insists upon silence. Politeness, restraint, the careful weighing of each word, yet I have never obeyed my heart so fully as I do this night, in the knowledge that peril may end us both." The Duke's gaze softened, shadows shifting as candlelight glimmered across his features, lending an almost ethereal quality to the moment. He lowered himself to be closer, bridging the distance imposed by years of restraint and societal expectation. "Eleanor," he said, his voice catching in the quiet, "it has been my constant torment to watch you, to admire from afar, to recognize that every smile you give, every glance you cast, carries more meaning than the world permits me to acknowledge. I have loved you in silence, restrained by the very rules that govern us, yet in this hour, when life itself has been suspended between ice and snow, I cannot restrain that which is immutable." He paused, his fingers brushing a strand of damp hair from her face, the gesture intimate without overstepping the bounds of dignity, and Eleanor felt her heart tremble under the weight of unspoken relief. The warmth of the fire, the closeness of his presence, and the aftermath of their shared trial had loosened the careful veneer she had maintained for society's sake. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, and the Duke, noting it, permitted a rare, fleeting relief to touch his stern features. "And you," he continued softly, "have braved more than any lady should be required to endure, yet here you stand, undiminished, a testament to courage and will, and to a heart that defies all expectation." Eleanor's chest swelled at his words, and a faint flush crept over her cheeks, part embarrassment, part the undeniable warmth of being seen in the entirety of her strength and vulnerability. Minutes stretched into quiet eternity, the storm outside a distant roar compared to the intimate hush within the chamber. Every breath, every movement became charged with significance, every unspoken word, a weight pressing upon the fragile bridge of trust and yearning between them. Eleanor's voice, barely above a whisper, finally pierced the silence. "I feared," she admitted, "that you would see only my folly, my recklessness, the vanity of defying the moors and winter itself. I did not wish to burden you with my courage, yet in doing so, I feared I had endangered more than my own life. The Duke's fingers tightened gently over hers, the touch an anchor in the tempest of her confession. You burden no one, he said, his tone infused with a gravity that bespoke both command and tenderness. You revealed the depth of your character, your strength, your indomitable will. It is not folly to act when necessity demands, nor shame to live in accordance with the dictates of one's heart. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the walls, silhouettes that seemed to echo the emotions vibrating between them. Eleanor, emboldened by his words, dared to incline her head slightly, allowing their eyes to meet in an intimacy that had been denied for so long. And your heart, she asked softly, what does it tell you of me, of us? The Duke's gaze lingered, intense and unwavering, and for a moment the world beyond the room, the blizzard, society, expectation, fell away entirely. It tells me, he replied, voice thick with restrained emotion, that no frost, no ice, no storm of circumstance can alter the truth that I have long carried in silence, that my life is incomplete, unfulfilled, and hollow without the knowledge that you may walk beside me, share my days, and dwell within the sanctuary of my heart. Her breath caught in her throat, the careful composure she had maintained fraying under the weight of his declaration. She understood, in that precise, poignant instant, that the forces of society, the endless games of propriety and expectation, were powerless against the gravity of their connection. The Duke's hand remained upon hers, a living affirmation of his devotion, and the truth she had kept hidden, even from herself, surged forward. Then I shall not resist, she murmured, her words a fragile surrender, for I have longed for this acknowledgment, yet feared it might never come. The simple confession, though whispered, carried with it the resonance of 1,000 silences broken, a lifetime of restraint undone, and an unspoken promise of mutual devotion. They remained thus, the storm raging beyond stone walls, yet within the chamber, a quiet warmth blossomed, intimate and insistent. The Duke offered her a hand, guiding her gently to a chair before the fire, and she allowed herself to settle, trusting the man who had risked everything to save her. Every gesture, every glance, every faint smile was laden with meaning, and both understood that this night had altered the trajectory of their lives irrevocably. They were no longer merely the Duke and the spirited lady of noble birth. They were two hearts forged by trial, connected by danger, and illuminated by the fragile, indestructible flame of mutual affection. As the candles guttered and the wind battered the manor walls, Eleanor allowed herself a final lingering gaze at the Duke. In his eyes she saw not only concern and admiration but a depth of feeling that defied convention, a love unshackled by the strictures of society. And in that look she found the courage to believe that love, even in the harshest of winters, could flourish, could endure, and could triumph over the rigid expectations that had long confined them both. The room remained silent save for the occasional crackle of the hearth, yet in the quiet, a profound understanding settled between them, that the peril of the blizzard had not only revealed the strength of their hearts but had created a space in which love, long restrained, could finally be acknowledged, nurtured, and allowed to bloom. Eleanor leaned back, her fingers still entwined with his, and allowed the weight of the night's events to wash over her. She had survived the moors, the ice, and the storm. She had faced the threat of death, and yet the truest peril had been the vulnerability required to speak her heart aloud. And in the Duke's unwavering gaze she saw reflected the courage, devotion, and unshakable affection that would carry them both forward into a future no longer constrained by fear or propriety. The night, though still dark and filled with winter's fury, now carried the promise of warmth, intimacy, and the first fragile steps toward a love that neither snow nor society could ever diminish. The first light of dawn spilled across the snow-laden moors, casting the world in a fragile, pearlescent glow. The storm had spent its fury, leaving behind only the crisp bite of winter and the endless whiteness of the landscape. Eleanor sat near the hearth in the Duke's study, wrapped in blankets still damp from their night of peril, yet a warmth persisted that no fire could fully supply. She traced the edges of the letters she had carried, now safely folded and untouched by frost, and allowed herself a quiet exhalation, a release from the tension that had gripped her since the first flurries of the blizzard. The night's ordeal had left both body and spirit raw, yet in that rawness lay an intimacy neither had anticipated, a vulnerability that had brought their hearts into alignment with a force stronger than fear or convention. The Duke of Ashbourne remained close, seated beside her in a chair that had once seemed imposing and distant in the drawing-room of the manor. Now, in the aftermath of danger, in the hush of a world softened by snow, he seemed less a figure of rigid authority and more a guardian of heart and soul. His hands, once so deliberately measured, now moved with subtle attentiveness, brushing a damp strand of hair from Eleanor's face, adjusting a fold of her cloak, offering a quiet steadiness that seemed to anchor her very being. His eyes, dark and resolute, reflected both the memory of last night's peril and the tender acknowledgment of what had transpired between them, a confession of mutual desire unspoken until the extremity of circumstance forced it into light. Eleanor lifted her gaze, and in that instant, the barriers erected by propriety, by fear, and by expectation began to dissolve. "I have spent my life," she said softly, her voice steady despite lingering tremors, "believing that courage was a solitary endeavor, that it was measured only in acts of duty or daring. Yet last night, I discovered that courage shared even in silence, carries a warmth that defies the harshest winter." The Duke inclined his head, his expression unreadable yet suffused with intensity. "You speak truth, my dearest Eleanor," he replied, voice low, resonant, and imbued with weight. "And it is that warmth, born of shared peril and steadfast heart, that I have longed to claim, yet feared to name. The moors, the ice, the storm, all of it has conspired to reveal what words alone could not convey, that my life is hollow in the absence of your presence, and that my heart has been yours in quiet obedience to society's demands, though never by choice of circumstance alone." The room seemed to constrict, closing around them like a cocoon woven of trust, shared danger, and the first tentative acknowledgement of love unrestrained. Eleanor felt the surge of emotion that comes when fear recedes and revelation takes its place, the sudden, electric clarity that the heart's truth cannot be denied. She reached for his hand, placing hers gently atop his, and felt the steady, reassuring pulse beneath the skin. "Then," she whispered, "let us no longer defer to propriety, to expectation, to the whispered judgments of society. Let us speak plainly, act boldly, and allow our hearts to navigate the world we inhabit, together." The Duke's fingers tightened over hers, a subtle, intimate declaration of concurrence. "Together," he affirmed, and in the single word lay both a vow and a promise, binding them beyond the peril of ice, beyond the scrutiny of the ton, beyond the limitations of titles or rank. The words hung in the room like delicate chimes, resonating against the walls, the furniture, the flickering firelight. For a moment, silence enveloped them, not empty but saturated with understanding, anticipation, and the profound weight of the choice now shared. Eleanor's chest rose and fell with measured breaths, each inhale carrying the echo of her trials, each exhale releasing the tension of suppressed longing. The Duke stood then, extending a hand to her with the dignity of a man accustomed to command yet softened by circumstance and affection. "Come," he said, a subtle warmth threading through his formal tone, "let us face the day not as mere survivors of peril, but as companions in a life we now claim as ours, unburdened by fear or convention." Eleanor took his hand, allowing herself to be lifted gently from the chair, the intimacy of the gesture carrying more weight than the loftiest speech of court. She felt strength in his grasp, reassurance in his presence, and an unspoken thrill at the realization that she had not only survived the storm but had discovered a love profound and unassailable.